Right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the current situation. We're all familiar with many of us working from home, perhaps being encouraged a bit more to go about the office, but I guess there is a combination of those. In the early days, I imagine there was a bit of a sort of firefighting, a bit of chaos with home working. Now people have had longer to get adjusted. I guess, do you have any thoughts as to what people should expect now from home working, IT infrastructure particularly, as opposed to what they were used to in the office?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. So, you're right. Before the current situation, a lot of people were home working already. But really what the situation forced was this rapid switch to remote working. And it really forced IT to adapt quickly. They had to make sure that employees were productive from wherever they needed to be. Even at the start of the situation, there was a head of IT turned around to me and said, my boss, the CEO of the company, had told him that the future of the business, the life of the company now depended on him. And he used to have 6 offices to manage, and now he had 30,000. That was the reality of the situation. And that's the reality of what they had to deal with. And I think, IT did a good job adapting to that quickly. The bottom line is the employees themselves really expected the same experience regardless of where they worked, regardless of whether they're working at home or regardless of whether they're working in the office. Employees wanted the same good experience that their company was delivering to them. I think the problem that IT had was that really in the past they spent a lot of time and tools and money on looking at how IT was created. They set up all these monitoring tools in the data center. They were showing that all the SLAs were green, but then all the remote workers were complaining. And fundamentally, employees were working in these hybrid modes. They're switching between home and remote office these days. They're switching between SaaS applications and traditional applications. And I think, IT's very rapidly had to move that mindset away from looking at how we produce IT to how employees consume it and manage IT at that level. And it's a completely different approach starting at the employee perspective. And I think that's the only way that IT can move from that kind of reactive approach to the past to the proactive approach that IT needs to cope with that hybrid environment that we have at the moment.
Okay, and do you think is it practical and reasonable to expect, if you're working from home by now, that you have almost the same seamless, well, hopefully seamless IT experience, I say, whether you're based at home or in the office? Or do you think it's fair that there's still a little bit of differences people might experience, whether it's in performance or service issues, etc.?
Yeah, I think employees expect the same experience, but I think they have to accept that there have been some challenges on the way. Is the best way of putting it. And that's not IT's fault. It's just the fact that, many companies were already coping with 10 or 20% of their workforce working from home. And then there was suddenly 100%. So IT very quickly had to catch up with VPN provisioning and with bandwidth, even with devices and things like that. So I do think employees expect the same experience, and that's what IT needs to deliver in the medium to long term. But I think everyone has accepted there have been some bumps on the road, and hopefully we've helped a lot of our customers overcome those hurdles in a very short space of time.
And it's one thing, the sort of the IT infrastructure part, that's I guess relatively obvious what it consists of. The other thing, I suppose, is employees. A lot of people are, maybe if they're living alone and they're starved of sort of interaction in an office environment. Do you think companies have a responsibility, or do you think they're stepping up to looking after employees, if you like, in a more pastoral way, or is that, do you think, not the part of IT stroke companies to worry too much about that?
No, I think they do, actually. A lot of our customers have certainly been talking to us around how we can engage with employees, and that engagement level, it applies at a lot of different levels. The first level you talk about is really just how are people doing working from home. And certainly, one of our very large finance companies actually in the Netherlands, their board was very interested in how people are doing. And they want to understand, are people coping well with working from home? And are the things the company can do to make their life better working from home? Could be as simple as helping them with their home Wi-Fi costs. It could be different applications they want to use working from home. Or it could be more social activities. Do you want to get together and just continue to form as a team with virtual beers or wine or coffee or whatever you prefer, basically. And then there were more formal kind of communications. There were many companies and countries where people had to do things like COVID declarations and things like that. But I think many companies have stepped up at this point in time and realised that When you're in an office, it's very easy to have that informal interaction and engagement with people and get a gauge for how they're doing and how the business is doing. When they're working from home, you have to put more effort into that, but it's just as important to make sure your employees are feeling engaged with the business, have the support they need, have the technology they need, and are feeling fulfilled doing the roles that they do as well.
You've referenced various customer examples. I mean, without getting too specific, do you think it's reasonable by now? I mean, was it three months plus that most companies should now have a sort of reasonable IT policy in place for home workers? Or do you think there are some maybe out there still firefighting and crossing their fingers and waiting till the day when everyone theoretically comes back to the office and everything goes back to normal?
No, I think most companies now, I think there was an initial kind of period where there was a lot of people trying to catch up. But certainly most companies that I've spoken to over the past few months now have a way in place to enable their employees to be productive from home. I wouldn't say everyone's perfect. They're still trying to figure out how they deliver that same great experience regardless of where the employee is working. And as they shift between potentially homework back to office work at some point in time. But certainly I think most companies are now in a much better place they were when it first came about, because it was an unexpected change. No one had planned for this. All the planning that people had was more based around building out large offices with a small percentage of homework. But certainly many people have adapted quickly to enable them to deliver the business and keep their employees engaged. And we've helped many companies and customers do that over the past few months.
And I guess proactive IT management has quite an important role to play in all this. It's one thing, again, being in control of your own infrastructure, company infrastructure, but again, with home working, without sort of exaggerating it too much, if people, have got their own routers and, laptops, etc., how can that help, if it's slightly outside of the control, I guess, what can you expect the company to be able to do, I suppose, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And, if you think about it, when you're sat in an office, IT's got complete control of the whole stack of IT the employee uses. And also, if you have problems, you can turn around to your friend and ask them. Maybe you've got an IT office on site that you can go and talk to. And IT can see the network, they've got full visibility of everything. As soon as people move to remote working, IT loses control and visibility of a large part of that stack. They can't necessarily see the device or the performance of the device. They've got no control over the network because employees will be using home Wi-Fi or the equivalents. And actually people are using applications like collaboration applications that are very dependent on the device and the network, which are parts of the stack that IT have lost control of effectively. So, IT operating in that reactive mode at that point in time becomes even harder. They really need to look at a different approach, as I said earlier. And that approach really needs to start with visibility of the experience. Are the employees having a good or a bad experience? And that needs to comprise both the hard data, what does their home Wi-Fi look like? Are they having good performance over it? Are they having issues with their device when they're not sat in the office, or specific applications? It also needs to comprise, the sentiment from the users, as we talked about earlier. So regardless of the hard data that we see, are the employees happy with the applications they're using? Are the different applications they could use to do their jobs even better from the remote environment? But that's only the starting point. Visibility itself is great, but I've never had a customer turn around to me and say, I just want more data, because unless you can drive insight from the data, it's meaningless. Okay, so it's great you've got visibility saying, are employees having a good or bad experience? But then the next step up from that is having that insight to know, what can I do to improve it? Okay, and finally being able to take action to do something about it and improve it. And really that's a strategy that we feel IT needs to follow to actually adapt to that new way of working that we're seeing at this point.
Okay, and I guess our good friend security rears its head, because again, outside of the office environment where there are firewalls and all sorts, people at home, you obviously reference them using their own IT kit, etc. How can companies best, or what do they need to be aware of when they're trying to manage security and compliance issues, when people are obviously taking data off site, processing it, storing it, taking it to the pub maybe, I don't know, but those sort of issues?
Yeah, I smile because I spent quite a large part of my career in security, actually, so I could talk for a long time about this. But let me give you the succinct answer. Really, from our point of view, the first step of security is always compliance. You know, making sure that things that you want in place to control data or user security are in place, because that's obviously something that is often missing from a security stack. So, and security is complex and hard for end users. Let me put it this way. So really, what we do is we can help companies overcome that complexity and help make security implementations easier for the end users. So a really good example of that, we're working with a large European defense agency at the very start of this situation. And they had 15,000 employees that never worked from home before that suddenly had to work from home. And being a defense agency, obviously security is kind of crucial for them, let me put it that way. And they had all these new devices, suddenly 15,000 new devices, and they needed to roll out full disk encryption because it's important for them to make sure everything is encrypted in case a laptop is lost. And normally, you know, the process to roll out full disk encryption is so painful. You know, you have to reboot the device, you have to open a new session, reboot it again, type in a password. It's a multi-step process to do that. And if any step goes wrong, it breaks. So we absolutely help that customer not only kick off the automation of that process to all 15,000 devices, but then guiding the employees through the relevant parts of the process where they had to type in passwords and that. And within 3 days, all 15,000 employees had fully encrypted laptops without a single call to the help desk, which was a great result to them. So again, by having that ability to have visibility, take action against the endpoint and engage and communicate with employees as they go through that process, led to a very seamless rollout of that for them as well.
And I guess one of the major questions is people are doing this, as we've talked in response to the current circumstances. The big question moving forward is, is everyone eventually going to go back to the office as we were? Or I know, for example, Fujitsu, I think just this week announced that in Japan, they're enabling people to work in different ways. And I think in a couple of years' time, they think they'll halve their workspace. So they've obviously decided the new next normal, however we call it, is here to stay. Do you think that's the best way forward for most companies to have this sort of hybrid approach?
Yeah, I mean, there is that phrase, the new normal, that you hear about a lot in the press. And I think the reality is there's almost two extremes of where we could end up. The first extreme is everyone just goes back to work and nothing changes at all. And the other extreme is no one has any offices at all. Yeah, the reality is somewhere in between those. And I think that's what the new normal will be, somewhere between those extremes. There are some companies that may look at one of those extremes over another because it depends on the vertical they play in and how their employees can do their work. But the reality is we need flexibility between those two extremes to deliver the service. And either way, as I said earlier, the employees themselves expect the same experience. So they expect the same experience if they work from home, if they work from the office, or if they're in that hybrid mode moving between the two of them. So really, to achieve that, as I said, there's only three things. One is to get the visibility. Are they having a good or a bad experience? The next thing is to gain insight from that. And the final thing is to take action, the ability to improve it. And then I guess the final point is actually, there's a lot of people looking for help in planning as to how they move back to the office, for those employees that are moving back to the office. And again, there's various things to look at around that. It could be we are working with some customers to identify who are the employees that are having the worst experience working from home. That could be because of their network connection, they're in a region that doesn't have good Wi-Fi, and could be for various different reasons. But maybe they're the employees to start talking to about whether they should be the first to go back to the office if it's appropriate. So there's a lot of different factors to play in there. But I think for me, the key point is having flexibility. We're all going to have to adapt. I don't think any of us know what the new normal will look like. But by understanding those extremes and planning for both of them, we should be able to create that agile hybrid workplace for the modern employee moving forward.
And I'm guessing, I think you've alluded to there anyway, but I'm guessing proactive, so as you say, planning and management of this sort of new hybrid infrastructure is crucial. If you just sort of carry on, maybe as I say, in the early days, making do, that's just not going to work. You do have to really work out, as you say, who's going to do what, where, and what's sustainable and what's not. Yeah.
Yeah, completely. I think, you know, as you said, I think if we continue to do things in the old way, um, it will not work, is the bottom line. I think the only way to move forward is to build that durability into IT from the start. You know, start from the employee's perspective, focus on that consumption of IT, walk a mile in your employee's shoes, and then build the IT stack and evolve the IT stack on top of that to make sure that it will be durable enough to support that hybrid environment between remote work and home work.
And I suppose finally, it's a combination of obviously the IT infrastructure important, but the people, if you don't educate them and explain, then you might leave them behind. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you think about it, employees have these constantly increasing expectations on IT. You know, IT itself is trying to live up to those expectations, and the expectations of employees is very much driven by our experience of consumer applications. You know, we load these applications on our phones, they're fantastic, they work first time, and if they don't work, we vote with our feet and we choose a different consumer application. But then when we come to the office, we can't do that. We can't do that because IT has very good reasons to ensure compliance and security, and there's very good reasons why there's a subset of applications you can use, and you can't vote with your feet and choose something else. So, you know, bringing that IT and employee perspective together is absolutely key. Employees have expectations, IT have responsibilities, and being able to get to the point where each party understands the other one and understands the reasons why certain decisions have been made, certain applications are being used, but has a voice as well if there are certain things that aren't working, or there are different applications or different services we can do, is key. So being able to bring those two parts of the puzzle together to get a joint vision for the company moving forward is absolutely a key part of the problem.
Okay, we covered a lot of ground, but I really appreciate your insight and input. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.